So here we are. The gutting of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 has brought everybody into confusion and panic. Some who support the act say that this is actually a good thing because it will encourage many states' rights to be protected from federal government. However, those who do not support the Supreme Court's decision, believing that this is going to set us back probably to the 1960s. So I think the best thing to do is let's figure out what the Voting Act's right is, and let's see how it relates to our modern time. And why do people say gutted? Because I didn't understand. What is the Voting Rights Act of 1965? According to Cornell Law School, Voting Act's rights of 1965 prohibits certain discriminatory practices. Congress passed the act during the Civil Rights Movement in order to buttress and protect the voters' rights under the 15th Amendment. So why this amendment passed is like what happened with many laws that were created in the Civil Rights Movement. It was a law to protect many African Americans and minorities against discriminatory practices. After the 1860 Civil War, many laws were put in place in order to protect Black individuals. One of the greatest amendments that were created during that time was the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment prohibited states from denying a male citizen the right to vote based on race, color, or previous conditions of servitude. This allowed newly freed slaves and Black individuals to vote freely within their states and were protected or given the authority to do so. It allowed many citizens to be seen as equal in the eyes of the law. Equal votes, equal citizenship. However, the Reconstruction period, or what I would like to call the beginning of the Reconstruction period, changed during the times of this act being involved. Reconstruction period was to help a lot of Black individuals to get on their feet, and this meant government sending troops in order to protect Black individuals that were in the South or in certain areas, having programs so that it can allow more educators and a lot more professional Black individuals to have opportunities and resources, and even protect those who needed the right to vote without being hurt by their white compatriots. Unfortunately, due to political negotiations, the South had a say in whether they wanted the troops to be removed or not, and the North, in fact, complied. Therefore, the government removed Union troops and even slowed down a lot of programs that were in place to protect Black individuals and allow them to have resources to grow in order for them to reach whatever professionality they wanted to. With the removal of the troops, many Black individuals were not protected, which meant white plantation orders or disgruntled white neighbors had the opportunity to retaliate. Many white men and women mistreated many Black individuals by using violence, intimidation tactics, or whatever came to mind in order to limit the power of the Black vote and the Black citizenship. Because states were not being monitored by the government, states could create laws in order to limit the power of the Black individual. And one of those laws included literacy test, poll tax, and more importantly, redistricting. I'm sure there are a lot of other internet sources out there, but redistricting is a very sneaky way in order to get more votes on your side and lessen the voter voice for those who do not care about. And in this instances, it is the Black vote. Redistricting, literacy test, poll tax, just plain old intimidation tactics discouraged a lot of Black voters. Many people complained about this for years, in fact, for 100 years, but it was never truly challenged in Congress. Eventually, the 15th Amendment just didn't seem relevant because if you were unable to vote due to these restrictions, then what's the use of the vote? If the 15th Amendment is irrelevant, then your vote is irrelevant. And if your vote is irrelevant, then you and your opinions are irrelevant. And if your opinions are irrelevant, then your citizenship is irrelevant. In the early 1950s and 60s, many of the civil rights activists who wanted to encourage more voter right protections was met with so much discrimination, mistreatment, violence, and isn't it just weird? I gotta stop. This is weird. I could just walk out of my house, get another nose piercing, go into the voters office, vote, maybe have a casual conversation with the white staff, and then go get a burger. People were getting killed over this. It's just wild. Many civil rights activists decided to protest for Voting Rights Act that will protect voters' rights and protect them from mistreatment. One specific protest was in March of 1965, where civil rights leaders decided to walk from Selma to Montgomery in protest for a Voting Rights Act. Unfortunately, they were met with Alabama state troopers who, as soon as they saw the protesters, mercilessly committed mistreatment and violence to them, including beatings and releasing of gas. For them, this was actually one of the protests that was seen nationwide on television. One such person saw it and was so horrified by that action that he called for a legislation on comprehensive voting rights. That was the current president, Lyndon B. Johnson. According to Kareem Creighton, the law was enacted as a comprehensive tool meant to undo the political hold of Jim Crow policies in the South and are related to structures nationwide. Congress adopted the law to ensure states follow the 15th Amendment's guarantee that the right to vote not be denied because of race. This meant the removal of literacy tax, poll tax, and of course, random ass beatings that released state troopers on protesters for no reason. Now federal government had a lot more control and monitoring power on states that were doing the racial discrimination. And The reaction was immediate. Black voters went up. They were able to vote without that fear and intimidation tactics. And states had a harder time on trying to redistrict without someone suing or speaking up against the injustice. Don't get it twisted. This was not just for African Americans. According to the National Archives, in 1975, a law was put in place that included language-speaking minorities. That includes Spanish speakers, Native American speakers, diverse Asian American or just Asian language speakers, and many other minorities that were being pushed aside for their voting rights just for, racial discrimination practice to ensue. Long story short, if you have ever experienced any type of voter discrimination, you have the ability to reach out to the government, discuss that what is happening in your district or with your individual person, and it is within the power of the government to protect your right to vote, just like a regular citizen in the United States. So what the fuck happened? The Voting Act's rights was a huge advancement and milestone that created an immediate reaction from Black voters and supporters of voting rights. But it also was an immediate reaction to those who opposed it. States who benefited from the federal government's lack of interference were now starting to feel the government's monitoring and started to feel a little bit uncomfortable. More importantly, they are starting to wonder if there would ever be a way for states to enact their own laws without federal government being behind their back. With so many years have gone by since the 1960 Act has been, enacted, many people challenge the idea of whether this law is needed in the first place, especially since there have been a lot of changes since then. In 2013, Shelby Count versus Holder, several states challenged whether the renewal of the law protections should be renewed in the first place. This would put more of a burden in the states because they do not live in the 1950s or 1960s voting conditions anymore. In 2021, Brnovich versus the Democratic National Committee made it a lot harder to bring costly lawsuits against racial discrimination. Both cases had Supreme Court support, which meant that certain section of the law meant that the states did not have to follow it. The federal government reviewing whether the voting frauds were in fact being done by the states. That has been done away with now. Currently, the only section that really protected a lot of voters' rights was Section 2. However, in 2026, just last week, Louisiana versus Callies, the Supreme Court voted in the state's favor. The Supreme Court struck down Louisiana's redistricting congressional map and rewrote Section 2, which was the main section needed to prevent the dilution of voting power among minority voters. This raised the bar for voters to sue states, redistricting, and paved the way for states to redraw a majority to minority districts, especially in the South. Basically, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 has been the major tool to protect the rights of voters that have been historically mistreated. Now, this has been severely weakened due to the rewriting or the elimination of some of the sections within the law that were the most potent and most effective in protecting those rights. Like, why would the Supreme Court give them this power in the first place? Well, Shelby versus Holder claimed that many historically racist states had to go through a federal approval before they even made many laws, which was an outdated formula since it's not the 1950s or 1960s anymore. They also claimed that a lot of states had to go through this pre-approval process, while other states did not have to go through this pre-clearance. But what I think is like the biggest problem is that Congress did not update the laws to our modern times, allowing many opposers to challenge the law and even change it for their benefit. As a result, the most influential sections, Section 2, Section 4, and Section 5, were either eliminated or changed in a way that weakened the power of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and weakening the protection power that the government had for its citizens. So here we are, many opinions. Those who support the Supreme Court decisions believe the rules are outdated, unfair to states, and are not really representing to our modern times, just a time during the 1950s and 60s. Opposers of the Supreme Court decisions, such as Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg, say that voter discrimination still exists. It's just a lot less obvious. Opposers also say that pre-clearance may look unfair, but it was also working. Reason why voter discrimination lessened is because the law lessened voter discrimination. However, the last reason why the opposers are mainly against the Supreme Court decision is because it's not a Supreme Court decision in the first place on whether to enact this law or not. They only judge whether the law looks unconstitutional. It doesn't encourage it to make or withdraw laws. That is the power of the Congress. Oh, maybe it just did, so who knows? Is there any hope? If you support the Supreme Court's decision, this will allow the states to enact more of their own laws without the federal government policing them, gearing towards true equality and leaving the past.
I think that's some bullshit.
This will also protect smaller forms of government from unjustly racial discrimination accusations without clearer forms of proof. If you oppose the Supreme Court's decision, this makes it painfully clear that there must be a statewide and national change against gerrymandering and congressional races. Also, this is a call to limit Supreme Court terms because of their increasingly overwhelming power and, more importantly, their nearsighted outlook on voter discrimination in modern times. Lastly, and surprisingly, to vote. Voting protections against racial discrimination and voting discriminations should now be protected by the very voters that they need to protect. According to the Brennan Center, a new law is being pushed into legislation under Congress, the Freedom to Vote Act. The goal? Strengthen our democracy, increase racial justice and equity to all Americans, and block anti-voting efforts made by states. People acknowledge that it is not the Supreme Court but the Congress that enact laws to protect the people. A baseline law is needed to protect the freedom of vote. Now, It's up to you. Regardless of what side you are on this spectrum, both know that the power of vote is extremely important. And even though some might say it is not needed, people wouldn't go up in arms about it if it was nothing. So if they know how important your vote is, do you?